So you can mute your
Yeah,
mic so I can confirm.
I had to raise my hand so
Yeah,
that you
yeah,
will see me.
yeah. Thank you very much for joining us today. So, so I was actually waiting for you to join us before I read your profile and start the session properly. So, all right, good evening, everyone, once again. Our facilitator for today's around, and I said earlier we'll be looking at data analysis and visualization in Excel. So yesterday we talked about functions and formulas. So today we'll be looking at data analysis and visualization in Excel. And our facilitator is no one else except Olayinka. Okay. So I'm reading our profile now. All right. So Olayinka is a seasoned data analyst and data analytic trainer with extensive experience championing data-driven decision making across different fields like financial services, investments, not-for-profits, energy, and etc. She is passionate about helping young people, especially women and girls, transitioning into tech careers and serve as a mentor through different organizations that she belongs to. So this is just short profile about Olayinka. She's a very known person in data space. Last year, Analytic Corper workshop, I was privileged to be part of the people she trained, and I really learned a lot about assertion. So she's an advocate for women and girls in particular in the tech space. So there is no doubt you will not learn a lot today. So just prepare your mind and your laptops, your writing materials, because Olayinka is going to teach us a lot today. So kindly welcome with me, Olayinka OK, for today's session. Good evening, Olayinka. It's good to have you here once again.
Good evening. Good evening, Pelumi. Thank you so much for that intro. Welcome everyone. I'm super excited to be here. Like Pelumi said, Ahmed did this last year and I supported him and I believe, it was fantastic. So we're doing it again this year and hopefully you guys would make the best use of it. So I would jump straight to business, especially seeing that we don't have a lot of time on our hands. Um, I will just share my screen. Quickly share my screen. Please let me know when you can see my screen.
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay. Okay, so again, like Palumi already said, today we'll be talking about data analysis and data visualization in Microsoft Excel. And I think I was in you guys' class yesterday, and I saw that you already covered some form of how to be more productive when you're analyzing data in Excel. And we're just going to go a bit further into that today and also talk about building visuals in Excel. So, what do we have on the agenda? Of course, we have an introduction, which they were going to talk about pivot tables. We're going to talk about pivot charts, and then we'll talk about pitfalls to avoid when using pivot tables and pivot charts. And then we'll have a Q&A session. Um, yeah, because they said I should put a quote here. This is a quote that I coined by myself. I don't know if I need to go and trademark it, but yeah, you say successful organizations are driven by data, not sentiments and vibes. And so, straight to today's business, like I said, today we'll be talking about pivot tables. And I think I was in you guys' class yesterday, there was someone I heard ask a question if the kind of tables that we learned about yesterday are the same as pivot tables. And the instructor said he should wait till today and he would find out. So today we'll be learning about pivot tables. And pivot tables are basically, they are not like your usual tables in Excel. Their sole purpose is to summarize data. And you must have heard like a lot of all the time, big data, big data. And of course, in every typical organization, you're going to always have this data that is a lot, thousands of rows, and you just want to summarize it. You want people to see everything that is in the data set, but they don't have to scroll through all of the thousands of rows. That's where pivot tables come in handy. So they're used to summarize, analyze, and explore large amounts of data in Microsoft Excel. And also, another advantage of pivot tables over normal tables is they make it easier for you to group data when you have like different categories. And also, you are able to do calculations on those groups, unlike when you are using a normal table. And pivot charts is like the twin of pivot tables, which after you've created your pivot table is still a table, but you want to show it in a diagram, then you use pivot charts. So they're used to complement pivot tables by visualizing data that is already in a pivot table. And so what that means is your pivot charts are always tied to the data that is available in the pivot table where you built it from. I think when we go into the practical, you would see a lot more of that. And so what's the anatomy of a pivot table? There are four core things that make up a pivot table: the rows, the columns, the values, and the filters. And this might look like, oh, normal tables also have rows, columns, but you understand better when we do the practical. There are other things that make pivot tables what they are, that make them function properly. And those are things like calculated fields, slicers, timelines, also actually time slicers, and etc. So that's basically what a pivot table is. And without speaking plenty English, we would just go to the practical. We'll take the last slide after some of the practical. So I would stop sharing this slide and then share my Excel file. I understand that the Excel file has been shared with us before now. So this is the data that we're using for today's session. Please, just like yesterday, please make sure that you open your own laptop and you're practicing what we're doing as we're doing it. That's really the best way to learn. Um, so the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to ask a question flowing from what we learned yesterday. Yesterday, there was something that Victor taught us, that every time you have a data set, there's something you need to do to make your data easier to analyze. Can anyone tell me in the chat box what that is? What's the thing you need to do every time you have a data set that you want to analyze? Okay, I want more responses. Create a table, making it a table. Okay, thank you so much. Change the data range to a table. Thank you so much. I'm happy that you guys are following. So, can somebody tell me this data set that we have now that you can see on my screen, do we need to make it a table, or is it already a table? The data set that we're seeing. Okay, fantastic answers. You even know book in this class, so that's nice. That's nice. So yes, this data is already a table, so we don't need to look for how to. We don't need to change it to a table. It's already a table. We don't need to convert it to a table. And how do you know that a data is already a table or a range? What you will see is, yes, maybe the colors, but sometimes somebody can format the color and it will look like this, and it's not really a table. But the undeniable characteristic that tells you that your data is a table is that when you come to this, your ribbon here, you would see this table design guy. The only reason you have table design is because you have a table. For example, if I open a new sheet and I put whatever, I put data everywhere, I cannot see table design because this guy here is not a table. So I will just delete that. But when you come here, you see, once you see this table design, you know that your data is already a table. So we'll go straight to how to create a pivot table. And I will show you the end of this data. Look at this data has 9,994 rows. And what that means is a whole lot of data. So, for example, one of the columns in this data is ship mode. Of course, this is superstore sales. So this is a record of sales that were made by a certain store, contains the order ID, the dates, the number, the segment of the customer, and a bunch of other things. And one of the things it contains is the ship mode. And then somebody asked me a question, which ship mode is the most popular that our customers use? How do you know? How do you find out? The manual way is to say, oh, okay, let me filter by first class and count how many they are, then filter by second class or filter by same day or count how many they are and things like that. That's one way, but you'll be taking a lot of time. But then another way I can even say, oh, I'm smart. How can I be filtering it? I can go to another table and do, oh, sum if other type is ship mode. I don't know if you've been taught sum if or count if in this class. Oh, I can use count if other type is ship mode, use this, ship mode is that, use that, and then arrive at all my answers. But that will still not be as fast as using a pivot table. So like I said before, pivot tables are ways of summarizing big data that you already have. So how do you answer the question of what ship mode is the most popular in our shop, in our store? You go, of course, you come to any part of your data or any part of your table. And just to be double sure, you don't necessarily have to do this, but I always do this. I do Control A, select all. So that way you've selected all of your data. And then you go to insert. When you go to insert, you see all of these things. And the very first thing that you see here is a pivot table. And as you can even see from the description, it says the pivot table helps you to easily arrange and summarize complex data. So you just click, you're not clicking the arrow. If you click the arrow, it will be asking you plenty of questions. Just click on this box here, says insert a pivot table. And so it's just asking you to confirm what this means is we had named this, the name of this table earlier is fact sales. So the range you want to use for your pivot table is fact sales. And then where do you want the pivot table to be placed? On a new worksheet or on this existing worksheet. If you want it to be on the existing worksheet, you check this and then you select the location, maybe somewhere beside the table. But best practice, I usually just do it on a new worksheet so that it's brand new and fresh. And then you click OK.
Sorry, Inka, for breaking in. I think you are not sharing your entire screen, so the pop-up, we can't see it. You can still see your...
Okay. Okay, let me reshare and share my entire screen. I'm hiding things, that's why.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fine. Let me share my entire screen. You can you see my entire screen now?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, so let me start again. So you go to insert. When you go to insert, you have all of these options, and the first thing that you're looking for is what you see, which is pivot table. So don't click this arrow here. It's just going to be asking you lots of questions. Just click pivot table, the box on top, and then it's just asking you again, even though you had selected the whole table, it's asking you again, what table or what range do you want to use for your pivot table? So it's fact sales, which is the name of our table. And where do you want the pivot table to be placed? Is it on a new worksheet or on this existing worksheet? Or you could have any other worksheet that was existing before, but I usually just use a new worksheet. So new worksheets, and then you just click OK. Once you click OK, it brings you to your new worksheet, and then you see all of these points. So now that you're seeing all of this, you have a pivot table, but it's empty. But what this is like when you have a blank slate and you can draw anything that you want in it. So how do you start drawing? When I was talking about the anatomy of a pivot table, I mentioned four things: rows, columns, values, and filters. So the moment you come here and this pivot table pops up, it will also pop up this um, field pane. So this field pane, the first part shows you, these are all the columns that we have in our data sets. The others data set, these are all the columns that we have here. And then these are the the things that make up our pivot table. So I will just, as I'm doing the practical, you will understand how the things drop. So remember that I said the question that we're trying to answer is what ship mode is the most popular. Now, there are two ways to build in your pivot table, either the lazy way or the difficult way. So I want to know the ship mode that is the most popular. If I just click on this ship mode, I just did it the lazy way. When you click on ship mode, of course, it can be like Excel decides where to drop it, either as a row, as a column, as a filter, or as a value. So how do you know where to drop ship mode? Whether you should drop it in rows or in columns or in values? Or why did you decide to drop it in rows and not in values? Now, there's something called in data analysis called a target variable, right? In this case, and don't take it too serious. Don't think it's jargons. A target variable at any time is what you are trying to find out. What's your target? So when we say that, oh, we want to know which ship mode is the most popular, that's a generic way to say it. But when you translate it to technical words, it means that you want to know which ship mode has the highest number of orders. So order and then ship mode are the two things. So which one is the target? In this case, not to make it hard, your target is the count of the orders, which ship mode has the highest count of orders. So in every analysis that you're doing, what will come to the value is always whatever your target variable is. And then any of the, you can use rows and columns for any of the other, how will I explain this? Like y-axis and x-axis. X-axis is the order, the target variable, and then what you want to split it by, what you want to break it into, what you want to summarize it by. So basically, we want to summarize orders by the ship mode. So that's why when we clicked on ship mode, it puts it here, and then we're going to drag order ID is what we use to identify the order. So if we want to count the number of orders, what will count is the order IDs. So you can either click order ID and see where it drops it. So now we have to go the lazy way because the order ID is our target variable. We don't want it to be in rows. So you uncheck it and then you will drag it and bring it to values. So now I've showed you two ways of, you can either click it and allow Excel to use its intelligence to put it anywhere, or if you want to decide where it to drop, you drag it. So now we can see count of order ID broken down to, of course, it says row labels here, but we know that what we put there is ship mode, right? So that is as simple as it is to build a pivot table. Now, of course, there's also the columns place. And like I said before, rows and columns, they work almost the same way. For example, I can drag ship mode from rows to columns, and I still have first class. But the fact that something is doable does not mean that you should always do it. For example, this looks better when it's here. You can easily see all of it than when it's the other place. Now, when do you now use columns if you feel like it's not looking okay? If they now go ahead to ask you, oh, of all the first class orders, which ones came from a certain country? Or in which country is first class most popular? Or there's another dimension that they want you to split it. So you have split order by ship mode, but they want you to split it by another dimension. So that's what the column is useful for. And the other dimension I will use, let me use segments, for example. I would not just click it because I want it to be in columns. So I would drag segments to columns. So now we know that of the 1538 first class orders that we had, 769 of them went to the consumer segment, 485 of them went to the corporate segment, and these 284 went to home office, and then the total is 1584. Now, let me call your attention to something. When you drag something to values, or when you put something to values, there are different ways you remember that I said pivot tables are used to summarize data. There are different ways that Excel can use to summarize your data. And how does it decide what to use for the summary? And I will give another example. So let's assume that we are not using order ID. Let's assume they asked you, or which of our, okay, let me leave that one and do another one. Let me put the order ID back. Let me create another pivot table. So I'll go back here again and say insert pivot table. So now we use existing worksheet because I want to use the sheets we were using before. So I use existing of worksheets, which location I'll come here and select this location and say, okay. So now I want to create another, this exact table, order, sorry, ship mode and segments. But this time I want to see the revenue broken down to ship mode and segments. So again, I'll pick ship mode first. And there's really no rule until how you select them. I can go ahead and pick the revenue first. I assume that, oh, let me just use profit. I don't want to be doing calculation yet. So let me use profit. So this is, you can imagine that. So normally, if you wanted to know the total profit in this whole data before, you had to like do is equal to sum of the whole entire table. But in one click, you can get the total of the profit. So this is the entire profit. And I think there's even a better way to look at it. So how do you want to break down the profit? You want to break down the profit into ship mode. So you click ship mode and then it breaks it down. And you want to break it down also to segments. See, put the segment here, but I will explain that later. I want this segment to be here for now. So you put the segment here. Of course, best practice is that you always format your data to readable formats like this. And that's how to format your data. Sorry, I'm moving very fast. If you need to format the data, even though there's another way that you can format the data, I will show you that later, but just use that because I haven't gotten there yet. So I was saying something. Can somebody tell me? So I want you to observe. I will scroll through these two tables, and I want somebody to tell me what they notice is different, especially with the target variable. Let me change this guy back. Let me format it properly too. So I will scroll across the two tables. So this is just me scrolling across this guy. And then I will come to this one. I will scroll across this guy. Can anybody see any difference? Hey, you are fast. Slow down a bit. Hey. Okay, I'll try to slow down. Okay, but I think somebody has answered my question. Okay, somebody said dependent and independent. The first is counts, the first is sum. Okay, I should zoom in. I don't know how to. Oh, I'm zooming the wrong place. Okay, I've zoomed in. Is it better? Let me close this pen. What is? I've zoomed in. Oh. Can anybody see what is different? Anyway, okay, so somebody, I didn't even have to hover over it for you to see it. Oh, somebody already answered. This place shows count of order ID, and this one shows sum of profit. Now, I will tell you why. Because if you remember clearly, we didn't tell Excel to use counts here and use sum here. The guy just knew by himself that he should sum this or he should count this. Even though it is possible for you to, so if I want to change this, I can actually change this to counts if I want. So now we'll talk about how to make changes to your pivot table. And let me tell you, all the changes you ever need to make to your pivot table, they're either here or in your, let me escape this full screen because I want to show you the formula bar. Okay. all the edits that you ever need to make to your pivot table, because I promise you we will not be able to teach you everything in this class. But all the edits you ever need to make, immediately you create a pivot table, there are two things you would see that were not in the previous table. This pivot table analyze and design. And as the name implies, when you need to do additional analysis on your pivot table, you use pivot table analyze. Everything that you need to use is there. And then when you need to change something in the design, paparazzi of your pivot table, you use this design guy. But all other things that you need to do, especially to your rows and your columns. If you need to do something to the column, you see this drop down here, you click it, see all the options, anything you can do. You want to remove the field, you want to move it to value, you want to move it to filter or to rows. Anything you want to do to your row, you see it here. And anything you want to do to the number, that's to the values, you also see it here. And this way I'm going to show you. For example, you want to count something, but the pivot table's intelligence summed it for you instead. This is where you go to. When you come to where you have these values, you click this tiny drop down here and go to value field settings. When you come to this value field settings, there's a lot going on there. So you can even change the name, custom name. You can change it to whatever you want if you don't want it to show as sum of profits. For example, let me change it to just profits or total profits. Total profits. So if you want it to count, you want it to do average, you want it to do max, you want it to do minimum, you want it to do standard variation, whatever, anything you want to, all of these options are available to you. So for example, if I change this to count, of course, you can also do number format. So this is another option of where to change the format of the value. So these are all the formats that are available to you, but we'll just leave this as decimal places. And then I change it to count, and then I click OK. Of course, we're going to have the same count as the other ID because now we're not counting revenue, but I'll just change it to sum. So before I move on, I will quickly explain to you how Excel decides which aggregation method to use. When I say aggregation method, how it decides whether you should sum or you should count. That depends most times on the data type of the field that you're counting. And I'll show you what I mean if I go to our orders table. So the first one I used was order ID. If you click on order ID and you check the type, where do you check your data type? You check your data type. Why is this guy going off? If you click on this and you click on this and you check the data type, you see that the data type is general. That's the number format. The format of the number is general. But if we go to profits, the second one that we used, that sums, if we go to profits, you see that the format is number.
Hi, Inka.
Hi.
Sorry, okay. You just I think your screen is
Okay, you lost.
lagging.
Oh, my screen is lagging. Sorry.
Yeah, it will just go back to the Excel, the data itself. But I noticed you were explaining data types for them.
Oh, okay, I see. You know what? I will not do that back and forth. What can we see now? Can we see the pivot table now?
Yes, I can see it now.
The pivot table.
Yes.
Okay. So what I wanted to say is the way that Excel decides whether to use, first of all, the two defaults that it will usually use is either count or sum. Anytime you need to use average or max or mean, you will always have to come here and change it. Now, what does it use to decide whether it will use count or sum? Depends on how your data is stored. If this data is stored as a number, it will understand that when you have a number, you want to sum it. And what do you mean? What do I mean by a number? For example, in every row, you have your profits. Your profit is a number. Your sales count is a number. Your quantity is a number. But your order ID is not a number. Like, for example, not when I say it's not a number, is order ID is usually like CX something something something. So it's not a number. But what I want to explain, which I'll talk about later in the pitfalls to avoid, is that even if something is a number, if you don't store it correctly, if you don't format it correctly, and for example, even if it is revenue, if you format it, if you don't format it correctly as a number, by the time you try to summarize it, it will show as count, and then you'll be confused because you were expecting it to sum, and then it will show as count. But I think the perfect way to just always troubleshoot your issues is to always look at this header here, and you know what summarization your pivot table is using. Either is counting or is summing, and then you can always go here and change it. But it's easier if you format your data correctly, so that when you come to so that when you create your pivot table, you don't have to be going to manually change it either from sum to count or from count to sum. So I think that is about that. I think the last place in this anatomy that I have not spoken about is filters. So what is a filter? A filter, as the name implies, is a filter. It helps you to filter things. So it helps you to separate information. You want to show only one part and you don't want to show the other part. So for example, maybe this report that you prepared is for regional it's for a regional meeting or a regional review, end of year review or something. And they're like, oh, okay, we don't want to see all of them. Um, we want to see sales for one region at the same time. At once, we want to see one region at a time. We don't want to see all of them mumbled up together. So you come here and look for your region column or your region field, and you drag it to filter. Immediately you drag your region field to filter, it will show here. And then by default, of course, it will show all of the regions. And then you need to decide, okay, so which region do you want to show? So if it's a review where maybe each of the regional managers are coming to present their numbers, you just need to come here and say, okay, let's see central region, and then you see central region, and then let's see east region, and then you see east region, and you say, let's see South region, you see South region, and then let's see West region, see West region. And of course, filters also work in such a way that you can, if you want to select multiple items at a time, you just need to check this box that says select multiple items, and that way you can select, say, South and West, and it will show the two of them. Now, the other good thing about pivot tables, if you remember when I was talking about um the advantages of using pivot tables, I said you can use it to aggregate data into different categories. So for example, even after we have broken revenue down um, into ship mode, we can still add another, how will I call it, another hierarchy. So already we've broken down first class into ship mode into segments. We can still break down this first class again into, let me look for another distance, say country. So you drag this country, if you drag it to be under this ship mode, what happens is that you can, okay, so unfortunately, there's only one country in the data, so let me use state. If you drag state under ship mode, now you see how first class breaks down into all of those states. And then you see same day how it breaks down into all of those states, and then you see all of that. And the flexibility, what I like the most about this part is how flexible it is. So for example, if instead I want to see the states first and then break them down into ship mode, I just need to come here under this arrow, this state, and I say move up. The moment I move it up, so now we have the states, then broken down into ship modes, and you have all of the states like that. And you can make it compact, or you can make it big. You can make it, for example, if I if at any point in time I don't want to see the ship modes, I want to just see only the states, I'll just right click on this and say collapse entire field. That way I have Arizona. So I have all of them. So I have the ship mode there, but I'm not showing it. At any time I'm ready to show it, I just need to click on the specific state. You will always see this plus sign here. And I just click on this Idaho. I can see all the ship modes in Idaho. I click on Iowa. I can see all the ship modes in Iowa. So that's a whole lot of a level of flexibility that you have when you're using pivot charts. Now, the part that excites me the most, at least in this aspect about pivot table, is another thing that you can now do. So here we've done what we calculated here is profit. I don't want to bother us with the mass. So let's assume that our net profits, let me call it net profits. Let's assume that our next net profits is equal to profits minus discounts. Please, if you're an accountant in the house, don't don't mind my definition of net profits. I know it's not correct, but for the sake of this class, because I don't want to be doing plenty calculation on quantity and discount and all of that. So let's assume that net profit is profit minus discount. And we want to, instead of just calculating profits for these guys, we want to calculate the net profits instead of the profits. What do we do? Of course, I can say there are two ways to go about it. And another thing that I'll tell you later is like to not overcomplicate your pivot tables. And I'll talk about that later. So to show this example properly, I'm going to remove this. I'm going to remove the segments, the breakdown to segments column. How do I do that? Like I said, if you want to do anything in your pivot table, just come to what I want to remove is the segments. Come here and say remove field. I remove it. So now I have some of profits broken down to all of the states and then ship mode. And then I also have, so I said net profit is profits minus discount. So I can also show the discount, here, sum of discounts. Of course, they also automatically sum discounts because it's a number. So there are two ways I can calculate net profits. I can come here and say net profits, and then I say is equal to sum of profits minus sum of discounts, and then I drag it all the way to the end, blah, blah, blah. But what happens when I open this guy up, and then I open this guy up, then I don't have my data complete, then I have to redrag it. And that is a very lazy way to, is a very, not lazy, is a very inefficient way to work. And so how do we fix this? Since we cannot add data to our pivot table, but I want to show the net profit. That is where I bring you calculated fields. Calculated fields in pivot table help you, as the name implies, to calculate a new field based on the columns that you already have in your pivot table. And how do you do that? I'm mindful of time. How do you do that? You go to, like I said, anything you want to do in your pivot table, if it's relating to a row, to a column, to a value, you do it here. But all other more complicated things, you need to come here. Of course, what we're trying to do is not a design feature, it's an analysis feature. So we'll come here to analyze, and then you look at all of these places and you see what to call calculations. And then you see these fields, items, and sets. And you already see it says create and modify calculated fields and items. So you just drop this guy down and click on calculated field. What is the, already it brings out this dialog box. And so what's the name of our calculated field? The name of our calculated field, we want to call it net profit. And what is the formula for our calculated field? See, Excel is really English. The formula, like we already wrote here, is profit minus discount. So we'll come here and look for profit. Profit, you click it, insert field, then you say minus, and then you click discounts, insert field. And of course, you have to type like this minus on your keyboard too. Then click insert discount, and then you say add, and you say okay. So this automatically it calculates our net profit. And this is better than how I did it before, because now it's calculated on all the fields and even the total. We also have the total, and we can easily manipulate it. We can open this, close it anyhow we want, and everything is fine. We can even create another field based on the net profit. And that way our report, our pivot table is just as neat, and we have successfully added another field to our pivot table. Now, before I leave pivot tables to pivot charts, the other thing that I want to show us is, when I spoke about filters, do you remember that and also, please, at any point in time, if you click outside of your pivot table, what happens is you see that that field pane disappears. Don't be afraid. Just come back to your pivot table. Immediately you click on your pivot table, the field pane will appear. And in the unlikely event that the field pane does not appear, you just need to, don't be afraid again, right click on your pivot table. You will see this hide or show field list. Normally, if I click hide, for example, it will hide. Then if I'm looking for it, I can't find it, even though I've clicked on the pivot table, I will just right click on the table and I will say show field list and it will come up. Because this happened to me a lot when I was just starting out and I'll be looking for the table field. So as I was saying, the last thing I wanted to explain to us, if you notice when I added this region filter, and when I filter it, for example, I say I want to see only central. If you were looking at the values, you would see that it's only this first table that is changing. The second one is not changing. That's because this filter was added to this pivot table. So the fact that two pivot tables came from the same data set doesn't mean that they are necessarily twins, or what happens to one will happen to the other. Normally, anything you do to this table 1, you have to come and do it separately to table 2. They are not, what do they call those twins that are joined by the head? They are not joined by the head. So like if you notice it, that it's sum of profits here is 286. Even if I change this filter, it doesn't change. It's only the first table that changes. This guy is still 286. So what if I have lots of reports and they're about the same thing and I want the filter to change? I want the filter to affect all of my pivot tables. The solution to that is the other thing that I mentioned when I was talking about the other parts of a pivot table, which is the slicer. What a slicer does for you is it allows you to slice or basically filter multiple pivot tables at the same time because normally now I have to create one filter for this one, then create another filter for this one, which if I have in real life situation, I may have 10 pivot tables. It will not make sense for me to be creating separate filter for everybody. So what you do is you create what I just called a slicer. And how do you find a slicer? Again, you come back to pivot table analyze, and then you will see insert slicer. Can you see slicers make it faster and easier to filter tables, pivot tables, charts, and functions? So when you say insert slicer, it's going to show all of the columns that we have. Which one of them do we want to put in the slicer? As usual, I will use the region again. So let me click on region and say okay. So this slicer will come up. It's not automatic that it will start affecting the two of them. After you create the slicer, you have to tell the slicer which of the pivot tables you want the slicer to work on. And how do you do that? You see that immediately you click on this slicer, you see this pane that lets you do anything you want to the slicer. And you come to these connections. Like I said, it's English. The moment you click on this thing, it tells you manage which pivot tables the slicer is connected to. So you click on it, is report connections, helping you to connect your reports. Click on it and you see this one is checked. So that means it's already speaking to this pivot table, which is pivot table 3. If you want to know which pivot table is which, you just click on. So I'll come back to that. Pivot table 3, for the sake of this report, this session, normally you can name your pivot tables so that you know which is which. But we know that this pivot table 3 and the second one is pivot table 4. So you just need to check the two of them. Once you check the two of them and you click OK, now if you come here and you select central, so you see that two of them are now changing. You select east, select south, select west. So now you have all of your pivot tables. You have one slicer that you can use to slice all of your pivot tables without having to add individual filters to your pivot tables. And you can just put that anywhere here. So I was saying, if you want to change the name of your pivot table, simply just click on it here and you come to analyze. This is the pivot table name here. You can change it to whatsoever you want. Quickly, in 5 minutes, we will talk about visualization. So all the while we've been analyzing, building tables, breaking down tables, calculating fields in tables, and things like that. So now we want to create charts create pivot charts. Like I said, pivot charts are an extension of pivot tables because a pivot chart is basically a chart that is created based on a pivot table. And again, I'll use a table that we have already created, which is this table. Let me remove this filter since we are no longer using it. Just remove it. So I want to create a pivot chart that shows the count of orders by the ship mode and also by the segments. And basically, I already have this pivot table. I just need to create a pivot chart. It's the easiest thing. After you have created your pivot table, you just need to stay on this guy, click on this pivot table anywhere in the pivot table and go to insert. And then you would see all of these things. Come here to charts and then look for pivot chart. Here, you click this down arrow under the pivot chart. And then it says, yes, pivot charts. You want a pivot chart. The moment you say pivot charts, of course, it's going to give you a ton of options on which kind of charts you can use. Pie chart, bar chart, area chart, map charts, surface charts. And as usual, of course, the fact that you can use any of these charts to show this information, it doesn't mean that you should use any of them. For example, in this case, there's just about 2 charts here that will show this information clearly, and it's either a column chart or a bar chart. For this case, I will use a column chart, and then you would click OK, and it will put your charts anywhere it likes, really. So, but then, of course, the chart is not a tree. You can move it. So you will move your chart just anywhere you want it. Let me move this region guy here so that I can put this chart by the side here. So now I have my pivot charts. This chart basically shows the information that I have on this pivot table. And anytime I change anything on this pivot table, the charts will also change. For example, if I come to, let me close this so that you can see what I'm showing you clearly. For example, if I come to this region guy and I change this to central, the information here changes. I change this to east, the information here changes. I change this to south. What I'm showing you in essence is that this chart is not, it doesn't have its own father's name. It's answering the same name with this table and then with this pivot table, because if you remember, we created it out of the pivot table. So anything that happens to the pivot table will also happen to the chart. And what that means is they are literally, this time they are conjoined twins. You can't do one, you can't do something to one without doing to the other. And how do you, of course, make changes to this pivot, to this chart? There are so many things you can do, like change the heading, put a title, add data labels. Everything you need to do, again, Excel is like pretty straightforward. Once you click on the guy you want to do makeup for, you see the makeup brush that has all the things you can use for him. So you see the pivot chart, analyze, see the design, see the format. So you can do all of this, change the outline, change the fill to blue, do shadow effects, anything you want to do, you see it here. You want to change the design to this type. Everything is always here. And this one, nobody will teach you everything. You have to like take your time to explore it and see what is possible. And another way you can, sorry, let me change this. What's this design? Another thing you can do in to edit your pivot charts is if you come here, you see all of these options. So for example, you want to show data labels, you want to even show the table at the bottom. This doesn't make sense. Or you want to do some edits, all of that here. There's flexibility. You don't have to accept the way they give you. You want to add a chart title, whatever you like, put it there. So all of these are different ways you can edit your pivot charts. There's so much more you can do with pivot charts, but like I said, you just need to explore once you click on your pivot charts and you come here, chart analyze, design, and format, you see all of the things that you can do with your charts and just make it look presentable and make it easier for people to read. And you remember when I was saying before that even though all the charts, you can choose any charts you like, it doesn't mean that any of them it doesn't mean that you really should choose anyone you like. Because for example, if I come to this analyze, if you don't like this chart, you want to change it to another chart, you can actually change the kind of charts that you used, but it doesn't mean that you always have to change the charts. Or you want to change, so you can change the chart. So for example, you come here to change chart type, and I change this to a pie chart. This pie chart doesn't give us the information that I want it to give us because now we cannot see the breakdown to segments. We can only see the ship mode. So the fact that you have option of all the charts doesn't mean that you'll be using anyone you like, or you change it to area charts. It shows it, but it doesn't show it well. So let's just change it back to the column charts that we had. And that's that. So that is it for pivot chart. I think the final thing that I just want to talk about. So because in the pitfalls to avoid, if I share my screen again, even though I've spoken to most of them, pivot tables need to be refreshed every time there is a change in the source data. I will come back to that. Then always check that columns in the table are stored in the correct data type. I already mentioned that and I explained why to avoid wrong summarization. Also, do not overcrowd or overcomplicate your pivot table. Sometimes you're trying to show so many things and then the table becomes crowded. Instead of that, you can use a filter instead, or you can use two different tables instead of overcrowding one table. Then avoid improper sorting and filtering, and also have good documentation for your reports or for your analysis. So when I was talking about data has to always be refreshed. For example, if I come to my orders table and I change, for example, I change all the first class ship modes, Control F. I can do find and replace. I change all the first class to first class. And I replace all. So now I've changed all the first class to first class, like one first class. And I come back here. The pivot table, unfortunately, is not a witch, and it will not know that I have changed something. So what I need to do is to come to, as usual, pivot table analyze and click on this refresh. The moment I click on this refresh, it goes back to look at the data sets, and you can see that the first class has now changed to first class. And every other thing that needed to show first class is now showing first class. You see our chart. I told you that they are conjoined twins. the chart has also changed to first class. So that's the thing about pivot tables. Every time you change something in your data set, you need to always refresh it. It doesn't refresh automatically. And like I said before, have proper documentation, make sure that your charts, your data is in the right type. And there's a lot of edits that you can do. You just need to keep exploring. And I will not be able to cover all of the possible edits. But yeah, you need to keep exploring. And in 2 minutes that we have left, I would take questions. Calculate the net profit again. The class is too monologue. Recording of the session will be essential. Somebody said they were not seeing what I'm clicking. Good. Does anybody have questions? I don't know. I'll try to cover a few things that I saw in the questions. When you let me show my, sorry, I'm trying to show the field list, show field list. When you have when you have two sort of hierarchies in your rows like this, what you always look out for is this plus sign beside each of the fields. Even though there are different ways to do it, I can come here and right click this guy and say expand. It will open it. But another way is to click this plus sign, which is faster. Just click this plus sign. But if I want to open all of them at once, instead of clicking plus plus plus, I will just come here and say expand entire field, and it would open all of them. So I think someone said they were not seeing the plus, they were just seeing they were not seeing what I was clicking. So what I was clicking is this plus or minus sign here. Let me check if there are any other questions. Difference between report and dashboard. Coding will be very paramount. Okay, I'm so sorry about the speed. I was just trying to cover as much ground as possible. The question about difference between report and dashboard, you cannot refresh your pivot table. What error did you have when you tried to refresh it? Okay, sorry, before I answer that, I was trying to answer the question of difference between report and dashboard. As far as Microsoft Excel is concerned, there is really no difference between a report and a dashboard, even though best practice is in real life when I'm working, what I do is I put all of those in one place and I put all of the charts in another page. And the way you format the page that has charts is different. For example, I can copy this chart and put it on a new page. And so I have all tables in one page and all charts in one page. And then it's just easier to read. So there's how you format this place. For example, you will remove the grid lines. Where's the place you remove grid lines? You remove the grid lines and a lot of other things that you do, Sha, on this page to make it look like properly like. So maybe you can want to say that, oh, the place that has the tables is the report and the place that has the charts is the dashboard. But in the context of Excel, there is no technical difference between a report and a dashboard. When you get to Power BI, maybe you would be learning that. But in the context of Excel, there's no report dashboard dichotomy. Is pivot table only used for large data? Not necessarily. You can use a pivot table for smaller data too, no matter how small your data is, as long as there's something to summarize, like you have columns that you want to group by, you can always use a pivot table. If there's some editing in the pivot table, will it change in the data set, like the sum of net profits? Will it change in the data set also? Unfortunately, you actually you cannot edit things in a pivot table. And that's why every time you need to, the only things you can edit, for example, in a pivot table is the heading. Like here, I can change this heading to whatever, or this heading. But even this heading, I can't edit it. See, it tells you, except you want to change. So because this data is dependent on what you have in your in the data set. It doesn't let you change it. Any change you want to make, you go and make it in the data set. Then you come here and refresh. Now the calculated field, which we calculated here, so which this net profit, is not stored in the data sets. So if you come to your data sets, you will not see net profits anywhere. You will just see your normal data sets. This net profit is only stored in the context of this pivot table. So you can't use it, like you can't go and use it in the data set or anywhere. It's only stored in the context of this pivot table. For example, let me show you. Can you see this net profit here? If I come here and click on this other table, you also see the net profit there because they are like the same, but it's only in the pivot table. You will not see it in the data set. So even if you change it, it will change here, but it doesn't reflect in the data set. How did I refresh my pivot table? Like I said, anything you want to do, if it's on a row or is in a column, you come and look for it here. But refreshing is not really based on a row or a column. It's based on the whole pivot table. So you come to pivot table. There are two places to dice your pivot table, either the analyze or the design. Design is if you want to do paparazzi, you want to change the color or all of those things. Come to analyze. Analyze is where you do more serious things. Under data, you would see this refresh and you just click it and your table will refresh. I don't know, somebody was trying to speak.
Yeah, so I think this is at the point where we give a very good round of applause to you, Yinka. Please, can we show a round of applause gesture, everyone? Let's give Yinka like that huge round of applause. She has really done well. I think I like your style of teaching, and I hope you can see everybody clapping right now. They're clapping for you very hard. In Excel, that is basically best for creating a data model. So you are building a data model, you are structuring a data model. But because you have not covered the data model part now, so you're going to leave that for now. When you get to the Power BI side of the training, you will kind of understand how the data model is very well. And just for you to even know, so Power Pivot started from Excel before it moved to Power BI. It's the same technology in Power BI that is in Excel. So basically, if you know how to build a model very well in Power BI, you can do the same in Excel. And I think I also posted a recording of a video challenge we did last year. And that cover Power Pivot part. So you can watch that video to be able to build your Power Pivot experience. Now, for this week, there's going to be a new challenge before we move to the next thing. And next week's session is supposed to be a review session. So this week, you have two kind of assignments, or should I call it challenge. The first assignment is the link to this course. I forwarded it to the group. It's a 5 day course and it's free. So you should do this 5 day course and get your certificate. Once you have your certificate, post it on LinkedIn and make sure you tag me. Make sure you tag me. That's your first challenge. Now, the second challenge is everything we've learned in Excel, we are going to put it into work, right? We're going to build a dashboard in Excel, an amazing dashboard. So I've put together what your challenge is going to be. So this is the data, the same data that Yinka used in the session. So this is the data we're going to use for the challenge. And in that data, you're going to build some basic report. Basic report like everything she showed you already, but we're going to build like more reports. We build more of that report. And after that, we're going to learn how to build a wireframe. So you build some wireframes, you wireframe your report in Excel, and you build a dashboard just like this, right? But it may not actually be like this. You may change it a little bit, maybe add a new color, add some inspiration based on your inspiration. But we're going to build a similar dashboard like this. So by probably in 48 hours, a video should come out on the YouTube channel that will show you how to build this dashboard, how to build this entire dashboard. So this week, you are expected to watch that video, build your own dashboard, and when you are coming in the next session, you are coming with your dashboard, right? You are not just coming to attend the session. So you are coming with a solution you've built, a dashboard you've built, and you are coming with that dashboard into the session. And we're going to review that dashboard together in the session before the new assignment came and before we now move into Power BI. So that's what the session is going to be going forward. So these two challenge, number one, make sure you do the video. You watch the course. The course I posted is a 5-day course. I think you only need to spend like 15 minutes on that course per day. And then you finish it in 5 days. Post your certificate on LinkedIn and tag me. The second challenge is a video on how to build this exact dashboard. I'm going to make sure I record that today or tomorrow. Then I'll post it there in the next 48 hours, probably on Tuesday, maybe. Before Tuesday, you should get that video and build something similar, right? Before the next class. So I think this is where we're going to stop the class today. If you have any further question, please don't hesitate to ask me on the group. I've also created a community so that I can easily post something that all of us can see, so that another message will not go on top of that. So I'm going to take 2 questions only. If you have any questions about the challenge I've mentioned, please raise your hand now. I'll take just 2 questions before we